Welcome everyone. We'll work on some simple little projects, at least to start. First things first though, we have to have a couple of sharp tools because we were messing about with some other things. So we'll just start out by sharpening a couple of the gouges first. Mm, One bowl gouge sharp. Guess we might as well touch up the 40/40. First thing we're going to do is an ice cream scoop. I'm actually teaching a class on that this week or next weekend. I figured I should maybe brush up a little bit. Also have a piece that I got out of the kind of bargain bin at Woodcraft as one of the choices for the wood, which is a white oak. I think it's white oak. It has the reflex of white oak, put it that way. So I wanted to make sure that it was going to be something that was going to be able to be turned pretty easily by a novice. So I have extra ones. So that's what we're going to do first. Show you my simple-minded process on how I do them. And then actually I have some other things to rough turn as well. Usually have another crotch piece, a catalpa that probably should get turned before it decides to start to crack. Because they will crack quickly once they're exposed to the air. Especially on the crotch part. Does that not look like that's grinding in the right place? That should not take that much grinding, but somehow or another, must have changed a little bit of something somewhere. There's the heel. Get a nice short turning radius in there. Maybe a little smaller. And that's that. So at the moment, really, the first things first is to each thing. This is kind of the, I don't know if you want to call it a pain in the ass part, but kind of a part that's a little bit kind of time consuming. I do have center marked on that end. I really need center on both ends, which I will need eventually. First order of business is to drill the hole and tap the hole. This is the kit that would be sold at the woodcraft stores. And these all have a threaded rod, which you'll see eventually. Trying to see which side. It has some really nice ray flex going across that side. So I want to try and keep as much of them as I can. This side's not totally cleaned up, so I can't really see them over there. I think for this, it really doesn't make a whole lot of difference. These I grab in the chuck, bring the live center up, and line the hole up, leaving the chuck a little bit looser than what it was. Line my center hole up, put the point in, and then tighten the chuck up. That way should be lined up with the axis of the lathe. And everything is still out. There's more than one of these type of kits out there that all sort of want a threaded hole in them. And do some handles, bottle opener handles that are the same way. So we're slower speed down nice and slow, about 500-600 RPMs. If I leave the tailstock loose as I touch the drill bit, it finds that center point anyhow. And then we just drill in a bit, back out because it's a twist drill bit. It will not keep feeding the chips out. You can go in a little bit. You can also just release the tailstock and just sort of push that in. I mean, we're not looking for a totally kind of perfect hole. You got to keep in mind that we are drilling directly into end grain, so it's not an easy drill by any means. And we're drilling pretty much the whole length of that flute. A little deeper will never hurt you on that. In fact, it helps you. For one, the tap has to have room because the tap is tapered at the end, so we need to go in. I'm actually going to use 2 taps because these, for whatever reason, the threads on these are longer than what that tap is, which is kind of another different little thing. So I'll just sit the tap in there. I use a cone center because this particular tap handle, wherever I got it, out of some bargain bin somewhere or something or other, actually has a center hole in it. So I assume that it's like a center point. At least that's my assumption. It seems to have worked for me. I put the stop on the headstock. This way I spin this with my left hand. My right hand is also advancing the cone center as I go, just to keep it straight. And some woods do not tap very well. I have a couple cherry blanks for this class, and it's the cherry that I use at the store. And for whatever reason, it did not tap a very good hole. I mean, it put lines in it and opened the hole up a little bit or what have you, but it just didn't do quite the nice threads. So it'd be just like the hand chased threads. The harder the wood, the better the thread would be. They certainly don't have to be perfect threads because these things are so long. And I'll show it to you here in a little bit once we get that far, but they really go a long ways in. Okay, going the rest of the way, last little bit by hand. Once it's in there nice and straight, they're actually fairly hard to get back out. Does help to release the headstock. And I really should go in a little ways, pull it out, and clean out the sawdust that builds up because there's really no good place for it to go. It just sits in between these. I guess you would consider them little flutes. And try and get it to come back out without wiggling all over the place. Like I say, since they are so long, and this is probably a fairly decent tap. These are the Harbor Freight Special that I've had around for years and years and years. So I just run it in because I need about another quarter to 3/8 of an inch of threaded hole in the bottom for this ice cream scoop. Because if it don't tap the hole, as I found out, it's very difficult. You would think that it would just cut its own couple little threads that really all that it needs, but it doesn't really like to do it. So I just go in another, whatever, 3/8 of an inch or so, or a little bit deeper even, and it seems to work. That's pretty much all I do with them. The only other thing that I normally will do with them, of course, bang out all the dirt. If you look down in, they're certainly not perfect kind of threads, but it is a piece of wood, so you're not going to get no machine type of threads. These scoop kits have two separate pieces. I'm just going to check it and make sure. Like I say, they're very long, so it makes them very strong. I was at a wood carving show today. There was actually a couple wood turners there, and the one guy that was there had the pizza cutters. And I asked him whose kit they were, and he said they were from Rockler, which he liked them. But they have a threaded insert that's, my gosh, they're only about 3/4 of an inch long, which to me doesn't seem enough. So it has to thread almost the whole way in. There's a collar or, yeah, a ferrule that goes on here. So this will not bottom out on the wood. I mean, it's going to be close. So that's deep enough. Like I say, with the cherry ones, it didn't thread as well as I would like it to. But I'm pretty sure it's going to be okay. I hope. And I have 4 of these oak. I have class size is only 4 to start with. Um, I have 4 of the oak, and I also have 4 walnut ones. Most of the people probably do the walnut ones anyhow. Everybody thinks the walnut is so much nicer, you know. But to each his own. And there, actually, we'll go. Could I actually put it back in the chuck? That really won't give me necessarily a true center with them. So what I normally do, I'm not going to use that live center either. That's a bargain kind of live center. I use a stem center on the headstock because I don't need a giant size amount of drive. I use my normal good live center. which has a cone for on it. So it basically can go between centers. Guess we could have sharpened up the spindle roughing gouge, but we're working harder on getting better with the skew, so I probably would just use the skew to do that. Just as quick. That's going to be the skew. So our center, our live center is going to come up to probably around center height, if not even a shade above center. We'll see when we start cutting, because we want to cut up at about 11 o'clock, which is pretty close to the top. And as always, we'll stand off to the side to start it. You never know. There's stranger things can happen. Start out slow, bring it up to the speed that you're comfortable with. Something like this, I'm going to turn this pretty quick as far as speed goes. We lay our bevel on, tilt it a little bit. We get a cut. Since how this is oak, I'm going to take my time, because oak has a tendency to splinter. If we get too aggressive, it's going to slip on the stab center. Now that we're getting closer to round down there, at least anyhow. I have to move the tool rest down. I'm a little high, a little higher than what I want to be with that diameter. Not quite round yet. We'll take the time to stop, and we're going to lower our tool rest just a little bit. It kind of has a pretty grain to it, but it's, in the same token, it's pretty plain. Skew doesn't feel like it's totally as sharp as it could be. So rather than going over to the grinder, I'll just take and run it across my diamond hone, like 3 times on each side. It's going to put our fresh edge back up there. Pretty quick and easy. Look at it, you can see the tiny little bevel that is created up there. I seem to always miss a little bit on the point. And that's all there is to it. So we'll just keep rounding it down, see whether this thing actually has a little bit of character to it. So it looks like it was pretty much there. You can also use the long point down. Do the same plane cut. Okay. Feels like we got a nice smooth cut, which we should. I'm pushing a little hard on that. You see some little like chatter marks. Okay. Let's see, we're done for this view for the moment. Trying to get in the habit of not laying things on there. Like I say, this kit here has a collar. Ferrule is I would consider it a ferrule. So we need to know where wonders of putting magnets on the pencil. Keeps them where you want them to be, or stick them fast to everything metal, but when you put it in the bin with everything else that's metal, it sticks to it. So if I use my simple divider things, I can slide that point down in there, and we know exactly where that ferrule is going to bottom out. And then we can just sort of hopefully transfer that over. Maybe not with everything in place, though. This is also why I do this part between centers. It'll make life a whole lot easier. So if we mark the exact place, thereabouts, that's kind of like a do not cross line, because we can't have that bottoming out when we're finished. And we just tighten it back up, and then we'll run our line around. I guess we could check, and we're there. So that's kind of the exact, so in all reality, we'll leave that line there where it's at when we're done. So now we'll go to a parting tool. We also need to actually use the same ones. I don't like normally use this one too much for this. I'm always afraid, even though I have these points rounded, this doesn't quite do what I like them to do. So, as always, we want to sneak up on things, so I'll just make that just a slight bit bigger than what the opening is. Once again, we can always take more off, but we can't put something back on. So we'll start out with a small, just typical 1/8" parting tool. We'll get it set out here where we need it to be. And we really should move our tool rest over, because anytime we're working off of the end, we're always going to get a little bit of chatter. We might get a little chatter out of it anyhow. So if I lay that over top, carefully go into where it slipped over. Right about there. And the next cut down to that. It looks like I already tapered that end a little bit. If I put a tiny little taper on the end, take it back just a shade further. And then we'll get our ferrule. And it doesn't, it starts to go over that taper just a little bit. So we know we're safe to go down to the taper. And I should actually get, if I only had an 1/8" wide parting tool, it would be fine. You just have to be a little bit more careful. But I do have, I made some 3/8 and 1/2" and 3/8 I don't have in hand. They're in something else. Or they're over in the, actually over with the stuff for the classes. So I use the 1/2" one. Once again, this is metal working steel. So it's rather inexpensive to purchase. So, like I said before, we're going to leave that line. Just a line. Smooth that up. Kind of like doing a lidded box. Excuse me. Might have to use a dust collector on this stuff. Didn't think it should be dusty. Still don't quite fit, so we'll go out a little bit more. So if we go in flat with our parting tool, then we only take off just a little bit at a time. Basically a lot of dust, because we were close. We were a production turn, we just leave the lathe run, but I am not that person. This is probably one of the second most time consuming part of making stuff like this, is getting these right. Tiny little chamfer on the end. And we are halfway there. Dang. And sort of even if these are a little bit loose, nobody's going to know the difference. Could even mark a line in there where it comes up tight because it fits on the end. Trying to see whether on the didn't look like I was tapered, but just remove our line. Now, tiny bit at the back. I'm just going to switch back over to my small one. I can see the little burnish line that I have there. And it's another one of those scenarios that I could force that on, but I don't really. There we go. So we got our gap. We could check it, which is always a good thing, and make sure that it's not too long. Don't believe that we are, since I left the line. This is also going to give me another little bit of a guide once I get this in there and tightened up. Almost looks like I should run. Looks like I need to run the tap in a little bit more because this is not uptight. Or I made that a little too long, one of the two. Oops, sorry. Put my face shield up and then you can't see. So we'll have to contend a little bit with that. This is going to give me a way to mark a line around here, at least part way around, to know where that ferrule sits on here, because I'll put a little bit of a chamfer or something there. Don't put it in quite so tight. Almost really looks like I didn't measure quite as well as I could have. So I think what we're going to end up doing is taking just a little bit off of this end of this end of the piece of wood. Not the ideal situation, but it'd be fine. It won't take much. That part will go back to the skew. Could use a spindle gouge too, something like that. Skew works just well for this. If I can go the whole way down to the live center, really not do much damage to the live center. While I'm at it with that, I'm going to take this a slight skim cut across here to make sure that surface is clean. Because there is no sanding in the world that will get the any kind of tool marks out of end grain. So it needs to be cut cleanly. Now if we put our little ferrule back on there. One more threading in. You run them in and out enough times they get a little bit looser anyhow, as far as the threads go. And that's where that's at. We don't have, it's not that it was too, it might have been a hair too long. Also, it's telling me that it's running out of threads in there. So if you wanted to be a big He-Man, which last time I did this class, it was, so I said to the guy, I said, let me get the top. He said, oh, he just muscled it and it will cut its own threads down in the bottom part. But to me, it's just as easy just to take the tap back in place, spin it back in. I have to use a cheap tap because it's smaller diameter up here. The other one is the 3/8 inch tap, but the shank of it's a lot bigger than 3/8 inch. Hopefully we can do this by hand. Should be able to because I only got to go a little ways. Just run a couple extra threads in there. Of course, now to get the tap handle back out is a little different. The other thing I usually do with these is put a little bit of the super thin CA glue in there while there's no dust and dirt in there and let it run down through the threads. Also, when I do that, I usually, once they're dried, I give them quite a while to dry. And then I will usually run the tap back in there one last time so that it doesn't gum things up. The other thing I've done, I did a couple of these before. I just took took the cutoff wheel and cut it off a little bit. It's like this thing does not need to be 1.5 inches long, in my opinion. Does sort of make these, because I don't glue this part in. I will glue the ferrule when I put them together permanently. There we go. This one's a bit of a gap. It still needs a little more off of that. And it's still bottoming out. And I'd rather it bottom out on the wood up in there than the other way around. Let's see if we can set this better. So it's kind of measured almost exact. And this is probably a little bit, it is, instead of being concaved, it's convex. So we take just a little bit more off of it, will be good. Once again, we'll do that with our skew. Making sure we go in, slight taper towards the center, rather than the other way around. And so you know when you're taking a little bit off, because you can see you can stop it because we've removed the material. It also makes that a nice safe way of doing it, especially when you're dealing with people that do not know what they're doing. And also sit on there and sort of eyeball a little bit maybe. Or not. Obviously my line wasn't quite where it should have been. Now we're good. Now it tightens up nice and tight against the wood like it should. Or you just leave it like that. Nice handle with nothing, no excitement on it. Although I trimmed that edge up while I'm at it. So if I take my pencil, I'm using a mechanical pencil. So I don't necessarily put a pencil line on the metal ferrule. Now we know where the ferrule's at. And it takes forever to unscrew them. And we should be done fiddling with that. What this is going to get mounted onto next is going to be the bottle stopper mandrel. You could probably could do these. Never really tried it that way because this is just an easier way to hold them. You could actually continue and probably almost finish them. You'd have a little bit of hand work to do down there. If you just wanted to turn them between centers, maybe you don't have one of those. They're kind of a handy little tool to have. They're not very expensive. Eventually you might want to do some bottle stoppers or something like that. So it's a Morse taper. At this point, I don't need to put the rod in, but if I don't, I'll forget it. So this is just a simple piece of 1/4" all thread. Comes through the tail, through the headstock. This has threads on the back of it, 1/4 20 threads. Just a simple little knob back here that's going to hold everything together. Because this thing, eventually when we release it from the end, I'll use the tailstock pretty much as long as I can. But eventually we're going to need to finish off this very end. And when you do that, then there's nothing to hold this in, and it will, it's not if it will walk off of there, even like sanding or something like that. It will eventually walk off of there. So you want to keep that a little bit in mind. It's like this piece of wood actually could have been a little bit bigger, but it's big enough for what we need. So we have our line down here. Hopefully I can see it. Yep. You see it while it's spinning. You won't be able to see it, but all I'm going to do is create just a little chamfer right across the corner. Down to about my line. I try not to go below that line. It just gives us a nice place to start, is the way I look at it. Now you have choices. You can use strictly a spindle gouge. You can use spindle gouge and bowl gouge. I have a tendency to use both spindle and bowl gouge. The bowl gouge is going to let me remove more material quicker, because I want to make a cove up in this area for your hand. And it'll be sort of a long, sort of a sweeping cove. Down into there. Something like that. And we'll go down just to the center of the cove. We'll go back up the other way. We'll just tear things to pieces. We'll end up right in center. Something along that. It should be nice and smooth. A little bit of a line there that will come out, sanding wise. This I could have measured too. Would have been helpful. So I want these to finish out, I think I figured around 5 inches. Somewhere thereabouts. So this is all waste out there. Once again, another good place to get rid of material. We could use our bowl gouge, use our parting tool, whatever, just to take that down, just sort of to get it out of the road. Doesn't need to be the whole way down for sure. This diameter looks like it's too big. First things first, we'll switch over to the spindle gouge. We'll make this roll a half a bead back here. just need a little bit, we need a little bit of support out there. Don't need a ton. Really, if we were so minded and wanted to work on our skew skills a little bit more, bring our tool rest back up in height. If you watch any of the production turners on any of the social media or whatever, they're always doing this cove with their spindle gouge, and the rest of it would be done with the skew. For them, it's quite quick. For the rest of us amateurs in the world, it's not necessarily as quick. I want to reduce the diameter right off the bat. That was almost a catch right there. And lay the heel of the bevel on first, and then start to cut. We should be able to go right down into that cove. And sort of, I think the last time I made these, I think I made this sort of a taper from the back to the front. Something like that. It's always a simple test. And that's just to grab a hold of it and see whether it feels. This is where I get in trouble because I'm a fairly tall person. I have pretty big hands. So I usually try and make them more so to fit my hand than maybe somebody else's hand. I think I'll take a little bit more out of there. Reduce it just a little bit. Stand back and look at the shape. Maybe it could come a little bit smaller in that area as well. This is definitely one of them projects of personal preference. I don't think there's anything that's considered right or wrong when it comes to this stuff. Just watch what you're touching. I just touched that. I didn't go back past that to make it super, super sharp, but it's still pretty sharp. I think I'm pretty happy with that shape. So I think we'll finish the majority of this off down here. Switch over to my 3/8 spindle gouge. I just have a much lighter touch. It's got a really short handle on it, so it's much more comfortable for me to use. Get the diameter down small. I'll go down to probably about 1/8 of an inch in here. That's fine. Left a little ridge in there that we can definitely get rid of rather than sand it out. Less sanding the better, as far as I'm concerned, as most people are concerned. So when we do things right, there's some little bumps and lumps in there. Probably could get away. Maybe you could get away with 220. It's another one of those scenarios. A lot of people talk about that. A lot of professional turners and stuff talk about starting with lesser, higher grits and things like that. But it's at the end of the day, it doesn't really make any difference what you start with. It's how well you finish it. So there's no point in being a hero and saying, well, I'm going to start with 220. I don't need to go any further back than that. But does it make you a better turner? I mean, working towards that, not having to start with, I'm going to start with 180. I don't want to have to go back and start with 120 or something like that. That's for sure. I'm going to work on tool control, things like that. And your dust collector as well. When you sand, take our sandpaper, roll it over the edge. Helps to break the glue in between the grits. It'll make it more pliable. I'm going to switch the chute because I was using the joiner instead of the over here. Of course, this is really almost another scenario of does have the big open grain. I don't know that I necessarily want to do that. I was figuring on taking this to the class. I wasn't dragging all that stuff along. This would be another case where you could dye this, turn this black, because there's again open grain. That would fill that in really nicely and big. Both sides, down the sides. But I think for this scenario, we're going to just leave it as is. Slower speed down the sand. Sand and spindle work is really, really easy. You can wrap the sandpaper almost the whole way around, which will make it sand quicker. More surface contact with the sandpaper. See, it doesn't take much. It won't go the whole way out onto the end where it's end grain. Like I said, this is 180. If I put 180 scratches in the end grain, they're very hard to get rid of. But like I said, it doesn't take much. We'll go to 220. We want to keep our sandpaper moving quite quickly so that we don't create all those radial scratches in one place. Go down over the end a little bit at 220. Get rid of the dirt and dust. And stop and look at it and make sure that we don't have no lumps and bumps or any other good stuff. If you wanted to, you could actually sand with the grain on each grit if you wanted to. I don't really find that it's necessary. I will when I get to the higher grits to do that. Each progressively higher grit that I go through, I will sand less time. Because all I'm doing now is removing the scratches, the 220 scratches that were left behind. And I'm not feeling with my hand to see whether it's smooth. I'm using my hand to get rid of the dust and debris. So we're on to 400. 400, I'll round that corner a little bit. At this point, then I will sand the end grain up there. I'll sand down as far as I can here, because I've left that little bit of support out there. was 320. Thought I was at 400. Okay. So that made this a little bit more round than what I would have made it. We'll sharpen it back up a little bit with the 400. I want clean, crisp detail, even though there's very little detail in this. Oh, I already did sand the 400 dummy. Forgot I got new ones out, but I had a good one up there at 400. That's 600. 600 would be a good place to go back and sand with the grain a little bit. You want a scratch-free finish. With that, we're going to break it free. And then we'll sand up the end, and it's pretty much will be done. So bring our speed back up a little bit. I'm not going to go back up to where I was at before. Got to make sure that the tool rest is low enough to get to dead center. Get rid of some more of the waste material. We don't want to bind up when we're in there. Little itty bitty bites. Being as gentle as what we can be. You don't want this to break off and create a hole in there, so I will cut it off and leave about 1/8 of an inch or so in there. Right there, that breaks free back there, which is where I wanted to break free. Now we can use our hand as a little bit of a support. I put my thumb on the tool rest, my fingers back there. I'm not squeezing to pull this towards me. I'm just giving it a little support because it's going to want to flex and push away from me. Once again, little bites. It's also where my really short tool handled spindle gouge does wonders. So now we have it cut cleanly. Looks a little on the pointy side. So we'll just pick up our cut back up in here somewhere. Nice little teeny tiny cut, moving nice and slow because this is barely moving in here. And I even wiggle the handle, the back of the handle up and down, kind of like saw it off in a way. It looks a little nicer. So now, probably going to need to go back to 320, even though I said I didn't really want 320 scratches. If I move the sandpaper across, it helps to sand that last little nubbin in the middle off. We also could even just stop the lathe and sand it by hand, because that little nub in the middle, like I say, it's barely spinning. So we got to make sure we get rid of that. Your fingers tell also, just feel things, and it tells you whether you're good or not. So now we'll just go back up through the other couple bits. So we want the 400. Always giving it a feel, because you can feel up in here little bits of end grain that stick out, so they got to be really smooth, or there won't give you the end result that you want. On to 600. Feeling everything. I've already sanded up in here with 600, but me laying my hand on, I could feel there was something. Some of it's because this is oak and there's so much of that big open grain that you keep feeling it. Go to 800. Also could slowed it down a little bit. It would have made better. If you go too fast with sandpaper, it'll just skip across the surface and it won't sand. So now we'll do with the grain, little circles, little random orbit circles, which will break up any of the excess stuff. Really does have some very big fat open grain on it, which is all filled in with, at this point is really all filled in with sawdust, which is not a great thing either. So I would go ahead and just up and finish that, but I don't want to finish the sawdust in there. So we give it a little spray down with some denatured alcohol. This is also going to show you what it's going to finish up with, look. It'll raise that grain back up for you a little bit too. More importantly, it's going to clean that stuff out of there. Like I say, it's exactly what it's going to look like once you put a clear finish on it. So that way you know what it's going to look like. This is really tempting to turn it black. That would be more stuff that I would have to take along to the class, and I don't really want to do that. It's kind of disappointing because there's a little bit of the Rayflex in there. There's not much of it left. So this is probably not truly quarter sawn. But that little bit of alcohol on the paper towel sucking it back out has sucked all the sawdust out of the grain. Paper towel gets opened up over the side of the trash can. And what I'm going to do from there, I know better than to go from there to my super glue finish because alcohol has a certain percentage of water in it. And water is what makes super glue set off really quickly. And I don't want that. So we'll set this off to the side here. Got some other things to finish up. I'm going to put it over here. I want to lay it down in the dirt. One thing that needs finished up. See, it's sitting here. My wife is trying to teach herself some pyrography. And I told her I had a little itty bitty cherry bowl down here from way back when. I don't have any idea when. But I did a little texturing on the side. It really it didn't jump out at me, put it that way. But all it needs, actually on this looks like it's a little bit, this has a recess in it. But I really need access to the back. It's not super thin. Oh, my little ones work in there. Trying to figure out just how thick it is down in here. Probably about if I can get in there. Now it's only about 1/4 of an inch where that recess is at. Maybe a fat quarter. Doesn't truly work for what I was thinking of. So I might have to get the vacuum pump back out. What I can do is finish up the inside easy enough. What I'm going to do is take that texture off, depending on whether this thing is spinning. Should be spinning fairly true enough. Yeah. So I think what all we're going to do is take the texture off of this. Maybe a little light cut, maybe with a scraper or something in there to clean up some of this. Look, my fingers tell me it comes in here and humps up. It makes more sense if we go over to that version. Yes. Because all our work is going to be in there for now. So we'll clean up the rim, a little bit in the bottom, a little quick sand. I do need to take the back off, or the base off of the bowl from the other week. That's kind of like a 3-week project. Several ways to do it. And Richard Raffin likes the spindle guides. That's what's in the handle. So we'll bring the speed back up. We take our texture off. We just drag the tool across it. And here it wants to start to chatter, so it's already pretty thin. And flip over and make a bevel supported cut. Once again, less sanding. The less the better. Just trying to make sure I got rid of the texture. Tiny bit showing up out there. Sort of also want this to be, it's not, I want it to be sloped inward a little bit. So, go to our old gouge instead. The other thing I can do is put my fingers on the back, give it a little support. It makes it become more gentle with the tool. Because if I push hard on my fingers back here, they get extremely hot very, very fast. And we got really, really fine little wispy shavings off of it. So that's, generally speaking, a little chippy right there. But other than that, it's not really the good way of doing this, for sure. You should make that right before you ever got rid of the middle of this. But it does work. We're going to power sand this, so I'm not really too concerned about any little ripples that I left in there, because there is some. Certainly not a perfectly smooth, clean cut. The other thing that we could possibly do, I was going to grab my scraper, which I probably still will. We do a shear cut, handles way down. Also, I'm going to use a little bit of the bottom wing. Once again, shavings that were coming off are very, very fine, which is telling you that it's probably really got you a nice, clean surface, ready to sand it up in about a couple seconds. This will probably haunt me if I come back up here with a scraper. There's some ridges some little ripples in there, but I don't have my doubts on whether I can go in there, switch to a small bowl gouge, the little 3/8 inch bowl gouge, because it'll be more gentle. We'll turn that corner tighter in there with that. Smaller, need it to rest up a bit. And do not go deeper in there or we'll have another problem, because there is a recess on the back and we're only a fat 1/4 of an inch in there. I did leave a ring in there. You can see it. It will sand out easy enough. Thing is not perfectly round anymore. It's sat around long enough that it's a little bit out of round. There is definitely some little lines out there, but they will go away. Doesn't feel very good right there though. Because this scraper is not really the right shape for in there. It's too big. And I think here a second. And I think the big bowl scraper is probably worse yet. Maybe. I would actually get rid of that. I need about 3/8 of an inch. This is also why you do this stuff in stages and do it right the first time. It's too big to get the rest of the way up to the top. It'll definitely let me get to the center though. Make sure it did what I think it did. It did. Cleaned it up nicely. Just have that little bit up in there. The real question is, do we take the chance? I did make a really little round scraper. If only I could put my fingers on it, it would be good. So this little guy will go in there easily. Put it in a handle. Probably, no. This is a traditional style scraper. So it only has a single bevel on it. I also have some in there that would be a negative rake scraper. Could also use one of them to get in that curve. Maybe we'll try the negative rake one first. if I make a mistake with the traditional scrapers are neat to use. They're a lot of fun to use. There's also a issue of if you do something wrong with one of them, it will self-feed and grab, which would be a very bad situation here. It would ruin the piece. I get a rake one. Actually, feels like it could use trip to the grinder, but I'm not going to take that time and trouble. You can hone these a little bit. Just a tiny little run across there. It's going to raise just a teeny tiny little burr, less aggressive. So this will let me to go in here. This is a double-ended one. This is made by D-Way. It's two different curves. It's the same curve on both ends, really, but this would be a curve in this direction versus this one is a curve in this direction. So we use that end. I don't even bother to put it, really don't even bother to put it in the handle. You certainly could. I still want to follow the simple rules of go from top to bottom. And as soon as I get that noise, that means I'm pushing too hard. And it's going to leave me some vibration lines in there. Whether it did or didn't is another story. It did right there, some little vibration lines. Like I say, it's not real sharp. See if I can bring the edge up this way. I don't use these just that overly often. Let's see if that helps it, because those little vibration lines will actually sand out pretty quick and easy though. So if I use my fingers again on the back, quit with one cut. All that did was remove those goofy little lines. I think that's just a good place to quit on that. Once again, it becomes an issue of, granted, you don't want. I'm trying not to sand things as much as what I can, sand things as least as I can. And when I feel with my fingers, I've left a hump there. That's a little guy. I think I can be easier and more controllable to do it with the little one. Even a little ridge down low. The little ridge is now down where my thumb is at. That's another scenario of sand out very quickly. So quit playing with it before you cause yourself another problem. So we're back to sanding. This one also won't get finished because it's going to, I gotta sand the back of it yet. But it will get, also needs fresh sandpaper. Give it to her and let her do some pyrography on it. Because as far as some of the people there was a lady did a demonstration down there today, the wood carving thing, on pyrography. We went and watched it. And of course, all those people want to use basswood because it's so soft. But she also had a piece of cherry that she was using. And she really liked that. That's what I told my wife. I said, cherry is the one. And her cherry was very, very pale in color versus this is This has got some nice red color if you put something on it. So I know on the inside, I'm definitely going to start with 120 because there's some little ridges in there. Slower speed down, 600 RPM, something like that. Take this curve a little bit on the rim. Do the rest from the backside. Inspect. If we could use just a little bit more up around that outside edge. Oh, that's good. So that was 150. We'll go to 180. Not a very big jump, but it worked. I don't think I can't get in there the whole way on the back. We'll go to 220. $400. Looks like I have some scratches going in here. And just by tilting the drill, when I go in, I tilt it down, and then I come back up on the top. That way it's sanding this way, then that way. Sort of gives it the sanding a sort of a crosshatch appearance. If you can see it, when you can see it when you're in the heavier grit, like the 120 and stuff like that, you can really see it. It's almost like somebody explained it to me the one time and said, it's basically like you were sanding in forward and then sanding in reverse. There's still some scratches right there, and they are sanding scratches. Now they're gone. So that's the inside of that one done. Okay. Turn the noise maker off. So I'll take the chuck off. And we're going to get the vacuum pump out. This normally sits out, but it sort of gets in the road for some of the things, especially because the airbrush is sitting over here for one. I use that more than I use the vacuum pump. Let me rearrange a couple things. It's sitting a little too close to the edge for me. Don't want it on the floor. That would inevitably break something. Okay. This lathe actually has an adapter that threads back into the end of the headstock, which will allow me to hook the vacuum up and pull the vacuum straight through the shaft, the spindle shaft. I do have some manufactured vacuum chucks that I purchased a while back. Definitely not a, what do you want to call it, a must-have kind of a thing. You can make these just as easy out of a piece of PVC pipe. I have quite a number of them. This is actually threaded to go thread right on the spindle. This has to be finished because it'll pull air through it. Piece of PVC pipe, a piece of rubber on the end. You can true up the pipe with your standard turning tools. Stick a piece of rubber on there, and you got a vacuum chuck for pennies compared to these are dollars rather than pennies. But he who dies with the most tools wins the game. I don't necessarily try to adhere to that philosophy. I have an adapter that threads into a chuck, in this case 1 1/4 8, will go right into the tailstock. Which makes this pretty much perfectly centered, should be. Never works out to be totally super perfect. Actually, I don't even need to, at this point, I really don't. Probably could have got away with doing this without that. I didn't have a center mark in there. Just centers it up for me. If I pull, find a switch, turn the vacuum on, pull a vacuum. My altitude, I can pull about 27 pounds of mercury. So that is pretty much a full vacuum. Release the chuck, pull it out of the road. Now I have total access to my piece. I may put the, not may, I will put the tailstock back up. The only difference will be that I will put a little piece of leather thing that I have just to protect it. I will go in here and do a little bit more work, probably make this into a bead or something here, just to get rid of the ugly sharp edge. It's also why I don't use recesses on many things, because I don't want to deal with having to hide that. I have learned some ways of doing it that are pretty simple. It's just a little block of wood drilled, goes over the live center, piece of leather so it doesn't mar the piece of wood. And now we're pretty much ready to sand. If we needed to, we could actually still do a little bit of cutting, and I probably will once we get into there. I'll do something. That's something probably ought to be done. Yeah, we'll do it first. So, on our soft pad, let's try it without the soft pad first. It usually has a tendency to give me a little, keep my nice curvature that I have going. Dust collection. Reverse. The reason I spin it in reverse is because of the dust collection. Does a better job. Started with 120 because there was tool marks to get rid of. So they're gone. The very rim is probably best to leave it go and do that strictly with hand sandpaper. I did round off the other. It's a little bit, tiny bit out of round out in that area. So it wants to bounce. Or if I do it with just my fingers will bounce with the piece. And my brush. This is one of the simple things that will help you get rid of that dirt, dust. Paper towel works just as well. Probably why I had some of the scratches in the rim that I did, because it left some grit behind. And unfortunately, inevitably, it's almost always the coarse grits that come off. These are the ones that show up anyhow, put it that way. That was 180. Probably could stop and take a peek. I'm sure we don't have any real deep scratches, which would indicate that it was the 120 or something like that. On to 320. You can see when you follow simple little steps in the process, it makes life a whole lot easier. Nobody likes to sand. It'll make life easier and not have to sand so much. As I tell most of the people that come and take a class, learn to control the tools, learn to cut properly, and then this part of it is just so much easier and simpler and quicker and all that good stuff. So that's most of it done. We left the sharp edge up here. So we can take our sandpaper and just run over that edge. Our sandpaper will make a nice curve. Hand sandpaper. I can feel it. It wants to bounce up and down a little bit. So a nice light touch with the fingers. Brush it off. Temptation is to grab it, touch it with your fingers, but we don't know if we left a sharp edge anywhere. Doesn't appear that we did, but now we know we didn't. So we'll go right through the grits, just like we did everything else. Sanding with hand sandpaper, I will go the whole way up to 800 with that, because I definitely are leaving radial scratches because of sanding this method. As you can see, it's still pulling sawdust off, so it's still sanding. You feel with the fingers, make sure it feels smooth and all that good stuff. Last but not least, a little bit of 800 on there. And that should be that done, ready to go. Now we're going to get rid of our tailstock. This is really almost tempting not to. I forgot I shouldn't spin them. Shouldn't spin them so much in the reverse. They're starting to come loose. Forgot about that. They don't always. I didn't snap it in there. The tailstock prevented it from walking off because it could have lost vacuum. And came off. So, do we be really brave and creative? That's the 1/4 inch beading cutter. That one's too big. Next size down, 3/16.
It wouldn't give me two. Looking to put two beads in there. So probably go down to the one, that's 3/32. Should be a 1/8. 1/8. 1, 2. Yeah, it should work. Tools. And I want to work out here on the very end of the tool rest so that I can put the handle way down. Otherwise, when I'm up in here, the handle has to come up. This is kind of a pain with these in a little ways. So if I want to cut at center, go down about there, possibly come up just a shade. Fairly good amount of speed. I'm going to make this go out here first. I'll mark the bead so that I can put the left hand corner in there, and then we'll make our bead. And it's best if we take our pencil and eyeball about where the center of that bead is at and darken it in a little bit. That way we know when we have a complete bead. All I'm doing is wiggling it back and forth. When the pencil line disappears, we're done. Back over to the other one. Do the same thing again. Complete bead. We're going to get rid of that last little bit because it's not enough. It's not enough to make a complete bead. So I just, I don't know if I can get away with the really, really little one. Now the eighth is actually small as I go. There isn't. No, there's one smaller. Now I've finished that out. Also gives me no way now. I could undercut that a little bit there, but I don't think I'm going to. This is a point tool, their pyramid tool. If I stick that in that groove and just rotate it over slightly, it chamfered that edge so that it's not sharp. I'm going to have to cut that other bead off. It's not going to look good. Because it's not a complete bead. So I just go back with my simplest way to do it is just a simple parting tool. And I'll just go back in there and get rid of that. Gives me a nice clean cut. The other thing I can do there, I know my wife, if I was do something and not like it, I take my parting tool that's ground at a little bit of an angle. I can literally undercut that bead right there just a tiny, tiny little bit, which is all I would need to be able to go back in there and expand out into that bead. I'm going to take my spindle gouge a little bit. That didn't thrill me right there. No, it's not sharp. like I say, this is kind of doing things ass backwards in a way. This should all be done. Normally, when I would do something like this, I would do all this complete before I ever flipped it around and did the other side. But this is kind of an old project getting a new life. So now we'll just give this a sand best as we can. I started with 220. I'm not going to put giant size scratches in there. It is the bottom. I do like the bottom to be finished just as well as everything else, but like I say, when you're doing something half backwards, it doesn't always work as well. It'll still look okay. I've left a couple little lines in there, more than what should be in there. It should only be two because you can see the difference between this line to this line to this line is totally different, which kind of makes it stand out. We'll just go through the couple grits here. At 600, I am going to touch the beads a little bit. Basically just the top of them, especially the one I saw there was a tiny little bit of a pencil line left, so it wasn't perfectly shaped yet. This could actually sort of flatten them out a little bit in a way. That'll work for what it is, what it's going to be used for. Turn some noisemakers off. Release the vacuum. Once the vacuum gets released, bleeds out. Open the valve, it helps. There we go, falls right on. No marks, no nothing on the inside. So there's our simple little cherry bowl, or I don't know, I'd almost call it more of a platter than a bowl. But it gives her a nice area in here to do some sort of a design in here. And this is what I told her. I said to design the whole way around the rim. In the cherry, it will turn out to be very nice and black. And then once she gets that part of it done, then we'll come back with the Parfix, the 3408, and finish the entire thing. So that's how you, well, I shouldn't say fix, how you complete something else. And while we have the vacuum set up, we are going to finish the bottom of this bowl from whatever week it was that we did that. I gotta remember don't really even remember which chuck I used. I think I used the bigger one. Yep. Because that adapter will fit any of my chucks. So this is going to the VM120, which is considerably heavier. In weight. And all that good stuff. But we're just using it to center this thing back up. So we don't need to have a ton of force to hold it. It looks like the small vacuum chuck is the ticket. I just push everything up tight. It doesn't need to be jammed in there. Because once it starts to pull the vacuum, it'll pull everything with it. This one, we get rid of this. Take the chuck off the adapter. Makes it a little easier to do it before you undo it, if you can. This time we do have a center mark, so I'll put just a little bit of pressure. I'm not going to dig that point in as deep as it'll go, just a little bit of pressure. Better safe than sorry, always a philosophy. Make sure everything spins correctly. And for some reason it feels like that actually pulled that. The vacuum pump changed tunes. It's trying to pull that off center. Well, okay, let's hope we don't. This is not a good time to see something go flying. Unfortunately, I can faithfully say it wouldn't be the first time. That center's trying to pull that off center. I get rid of the center point. Why are you changing tunes on me, vacuum? And obviously I don't have that very well centered or something. Exactly. That's why. The sucker still wasn't locked in tight. Your ears are always the best defense on all this stuff. As I moved that around, I could hear the vacuum pump change tunes. So that meant it wasn't holding something quite right. Doesn't look like that's very well. Not totally well centered, but it won't hurt us. Some of the people that I'm teaching, they can't believe it. Just use a center point and a jam chuck to take the tenon off for them. They're like, that's way out of whack. I said, you won't know the difference. I said, because it will end up being flat almost no matter what you do. So I'll go back to my small little 3/8 bowl gouge for the most part of this. I use the bowl gouge a little bit and also use a spindle gouge. Keep the speed down. Vacuum pumps only want to run at about 1,000 RPMs to start with, so they tell me. I know people that turn a lot faster than that using a vacuum, but this makes you take smaller cuts. I will tell you this much, if you ever take, and this is experience talking, I should have measured the bottom of the bowl. I didn't do that. If you go through the bottom, and it's being held on by vacuum, you'll find out how much force is being applied by the vacuum, which is a lot. It sounds like a cannon going on when it snaps that piece of wood out. Quite interesting. I've only ever had to do it once, and can faithfully say that was once was about enough. So making sure I'm getting a nice clean cut. Also want it to be undercut a bit, which it is. So I'll go back and make a nice clean cut towards center. Slow and steady wins the race. Stop short of the clump in the middle. So you get rid of the tailstock. That is some of the grain filler. If you go back like 2 weeks, probably 2 weeks ago, maybe, sort of a little bit of a process. This one here was dyed black, a coat of Zinsser Seal Coat, which is a really thin, non-waxed shellac. And then you put the grain filler over it. Come back with another coat of the thin shellac once the grain filler is set up, which sets up very quickly. And then that's some water-based lacquer over top of that. Another 3 coats or so. But it doesn't work on pens because you don't have a big enough area. I've seen people try it on pens and it just doesn't, there's not enough area. And the wood has to have open grain, which this is ash. That the ice cream scoop that I did earlier, which I'll probably put a coat of the 3408 on before we're done. I thought about doing it with that too because it has some really big grain. But yeah, a pen does not work. There's not enough area for it. Yeah, right. I thought I had it. I'll have to get my son-in-law on that. It's been a long time since I've done the stuff on Twitch. It's the only one. This is being broadcasted on Twitch as well as YouTube. Back to dust collection. We're going to give this a sand. There's a little bit of bleed through from the dye, but you almost can't get away with some of that without a little bit of that, I should say. Okay, I'll have to try that then. So just like I did on the outside of the bowl, we'll go the whole way to the 400 in here. Last thing I do with them is I will put 2 little grooves in here, somewhere in here, somewhere out about here. Same little pyramid tool. There's lots of things that you can put this little groove in. I make it fairly deep, not super, deep enough you can see it. Lastly, we'll just give that a little light sand over top of them because it will raise a little bit up on them. Sand across the grain with the grain all around the grain. Mainly go out around this little outside edge a little bit so it's not sharp. That's pretty much it. Simple, easy peasy. This needs to be buffed yet, but I'll wait till what I normally do, I'll write the type of wood it is up here. I don't date any of the stuff, and then I'll put my initials in the bottom. That's one of the reasons for the two lines, so you can have a place to write around there to make it nice and neat. But yes, this is grain filled. This, like I said, the one I did like 2 weeks ago. This is this is supposed to be a chameleon grain filler. Which one did I use? I got 3 of them. I tried all 3 so far. Trying to think. I think this one is teal. Yeah, this is the teal purple. To me, it's pretty much more teal. If we go back strictly overhead, you'll see it better. Doesn't show up real well on camera. The other thing I should have done, I have the seal coated shellac. I put some trans tint dye in it to make it black. This would look better. This is sort of a muted black in a lot of areas. The darker black it is, the better it is. The darker the color. It doesn't have to be black. It just has to be a dark color so that this stuff will show up. But it's more teal. This one is gold green. Once again, to me, it's more gold. I mean, you get it in the right light. It does show some of the green, but it's more of the gold as far as I'm concerned. So it's not. I don't know that I would recommend them because of that, but it was something that I wanted to try. So we tried it. And that's what a lot of this is all about is try it and see whether you like it. If you don't like it, then you just move on and try something else. The only problem with those grain fillers is they are kind of, to me, they're a little on the pricey side. A little tube is pretty much $20. They do last a very, very long time. That's one of the benefits I will give them is you don't lose. I didn't want to stay tight, but now it's tight. They do last a long time, but like you pointed out earlier, they're not something to use on pens. Pens leave themselves. I don't do many pens anymore. Would be to use some. I don't have it in my hand right at the moment. Some curly maple. Curly maple is really cool on pens. You can even do curly maple all by itself and finish it up, and it'll show all the curly parts of it. Or you can play around with some of the dyes and dye them, which which really makes a stunning kind of a pen. Um, but I think that's going to be, yeah, it's 20 after 8. I think that's going to be it. I still have to cook food for my lunches. So I think that's enough. I'm going to put a coat finish on this just to show what it's going to look like. This is the ice cream scoop handle that we did earlier. The only reason I didn't finish it at that point is because I used alcohol on it. And if you know anything about super glue dries in the presence of moisture. So putting denatured alcohol on it, I learned that the hard way that there's a certain amount of water, I guess, left in the denatured alcohol from the distilling process. So it makes the super glue set up in a matter of seconds instead of the 40 seconds or more that I get normally. So it's best to leave it on its own for a little while. 3460. Over here. This is probably what 90% of my stuff is finished with. Just a simple, this is Parfix 3408. It's a slow setting super glue. No odor, no reaction with the paper towels.
has a 40-second time delay, which is a lot. Even though it doesn't sound like a lot, it is. In this case, we're going to spin this at the slowest speed that I can go at, which about 135 RPMs. Something under 200 will work. Get my paper towel wet, put it on there, and I will just literally dribble it on the top. I want to saturate the piece. Go around to the end grain. Doesn't matter that I got a little bit on down there. Won't hurt a thing. Put a nice and thick coat on there, and what it's going to do is going to soak in. As you see, this is not your typical super glue, because if it would already be set. So clean up the bottle, tip of the bottle, so I don't have a mess. There's still plenty of it sitting on the surface. So we'll start and we'll dry it off. Start to dry it off while it's still spinning. Once we stop, we'll go with the grain any way you want to go. Wipe off the excess. I want it to be relatively dry. I don't want to leave any of this sitting on the surface, because what sits on the surface doesn't know what to do and will beat up like a well-waxed car. This is a one coat finish. Once I'm happy with it nice and dry, it does have some really big grain. It's not a really, as far as I'm concerned, it's not a real pretty piece. This would also be a piece that I said earlier would be a good one to do the black on it, because all this big summer growth grain that's in there, or maybe that's the winter growth, the big open grain part of it, it would come in both sides where you have all face grain. That side's not quite as prominent, but all that would fill in with the grain filler and would look quite interesting. Last but not least, we can give it a little accelerator. In my climate, I really wouldn't have to. One squirt across, about 12 to 18 inches away, just so the mist lands on it. That's all I want to do. Has a 24-hour cure time, so that's pretty much all I do to it at this point. Let it set up overnight. I probably won't get to it for a week. Some other day, maybe some evening this week that I manage to get out of work at a reasonable hour. Come down and I'll buff it with some, I use a product called Vonex. It's designed to buff plastics and lacquer. Buff it on a buffing wheel and coat a card removable wax. Well, thank you, Codes. Subscribing to the channel. That's something that doesn't happen very often. That's why I hate this vacuum pump out here. I probably can't get it back off now. Yep, there we go. So you see how easily I pulled that off? I just gave it a twist and it pops out of the Morse taper. That's why it had the 1/4 inch rod going through to hold it, to make sure that it doesn't pop off when there's no support by tailstock, because it will come out. That's not something that I guess at. I know it will. I've done different things with just a Morse taper in there. Same way with my buffing wheels. They get the same, it has the same Morse taper on them. They will pop right out of there without a doubt. So I'll let that cure, give it a buff, and it'll be ready to take to my class next week. So I have one to show them, what they're trying to accomplish in 3 hours. other than that, I think we are going to call it a day. Yeah. Anybody else have any questions, comments, likes, dislikes, all that good stuff? Any of that good stuff? You're quite welcome. Enjoy. I will not be here next week for sure because I have class. I had teaching classes Friday and Saturday, so generally till I'm done on Saturday, I've had enough. Not quite used to being on my feet for 8 or 9 hours like that. So yeah, I'll be back in 2 weeks, Saturday evening. That's my thing. So stop back and say hi. I'll try and find something else to do of interest. Got lots of wet wood to be doing right now, but kind of hate to do that each and every week. So we'll just leave it at that. Let me see. Now, first things first. I also do this live on YouTube as well. Same same name, Caps Creations. Um, so if you have an interest in going back and seeing something I did, Twitch doesn't keep it very long, but YouTube it's there forever. So we'll end that stream on YouTube, and I'll see if I can figure out how to